And yeah, we have been watching Florence through the day today, moving quickly off to the northwest now. Went through a little cycle of weakening earlier today and actually technically down to a Category 3, but still a very powerful hurricane at 125 miles per hour. And that little bump down, likely just temporary, likely going to come back up to Category 4 status as we head into the day tomorrow. There's that forward motion to the northwest at 16 miles per hour. If there is some good news today, it's been that we finally, looks like we're starting to solidify the forecast track, and hopefully we're done with any more significant adjustments. That means we can really start to hone in on the impacts. The latest forecast track, again, this was from 11 o'clock this morning, approaching the coast of North Carolina as a Category 4 hurricane as we work our way through the day Thursday. Likely as we head towards Friday morning, just offshore of Wilmington or perhaps Cape Fear as a Category 3, and then just kind of meandering and drifting its way southward offshore the Grand Strand, and then finally beginning to come in and weaken as we work our way through the weekend. But it's a slow moving process. It's a slow moving storm, and that means a prolonged period of impacts, including a prolonged period of very heavy rainfall. And we have significantly adjusted our rainfall forecast upwards now, going 8 to 12 inches for most of Horry County into Georgetown County, Williamsburg County, with pockets where we could see higher amounts over 15 inches. Even across the PD, we're generally talking 5 to 10 inches of rain with locally some higher amounts. Now through the day tomorrow, we're going to keep things quiet. Notice 7 a.m. Thursday morning, it is dry. The winds aren't even that bad. It does turn cloudy through the day today, through the day tomorrow as Florence gets closer. Notice here as we head towards tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening, we can start to see the first outer bands from Florence off to our east. We start to see our winds picking up and perhaps a couple of showers finally blowing in. That means most of the day tomorrow is dry and not too terribly windy if you're making any last minute preparations. After tomorrow night, though, conditions go downhill and they stay bad for quite some time. Robert and I breaking down all those very important impacts from Florence coming up. All right, welcome back. 4:15 here. We have seen the fairly dramatic shifts in the forecast track since yesterday. Those shifts seem to be calming down now.
Yeah, I think we're to the point where you're not going to see any big changes. It may move around 15, 20 miles in either direction. I think what's basically guaranteed now, it's going to be a very slow moving storm and a prolonged event. As we've warned you, it's a little bit slower to get here, but also going to stick around for a few days.
Exactly. But while it may not be the track we wanted to see, we can now really start to fine tune some of those forecast details. One of the big ones, especially in regards to anybody living or has property on the ocean, especially those who evacuated, is the storm surge. And this is a different beast than Matthew was as far as storm surge goes. It's a little bit opposite of what we typically think, and it's fairly complicated. The general scenario is 4 to 6 foot storm surge for Horry County, perhaps pushing that 6 to 9 as you get closer towards the border. And then, of course, once you're around the bend over there, that's where they could be talking about as much as a 12 to 14 foot storm surge. But this actually comes on the backside of the storm.
Yeah, on the first part of the storm, where it's the strongest, the winds here are blowing offshore. And as we mentioned the last couple of days, that pushes the water away. The reason that is stronger on the other side, the winds are blowing onshore, so it pushes all the water in. So we're on the good side for a bit, but then notice what happens as the storm moves to our south. Yeah,
let's explain this to you. So these are the individual high tides that start at 11 o'clock tomorrow night, going through the high tide that we have at 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. It's tomorrow night's high tide. It's lunchtime Friday's high tide that we're likely to have those fairly strong offshore winds, and that's going to prevent any surge. In fact, we may even see a bit of a blowout and some low water levels depending on how strong those winds are. But then we start to see things switching up a bit, especially once we get the system likely offshore. And that's when our winds switch back around.
And pushes it all in. 4 to 6 feet. I think that's going to be issues in the kind of typical trouble spots. Cherry Grove, Murrells Inlet, Garden City. You know the areas that see the problems. Parley's Island. If the tides are a little bit higher, going to see some flooding concerns. And this may go over some of those causeways at the peaks here. But notice the timing again, thinking Saturday, Sunday, hopefully some improvements by the next high tide Sunday afternoon.
Right. So let's jump into the big picture here. We'll show you again what Hurricane Florence looks like here this afternoon. The satellite presentation still very impressive. Moving to the northwest, 16 miles per hour, a very solid Category 3 hurricane. Went through a little bit of a reorganization through the day today, kind of wobbled, kind of weakened a little bit. Notice the eye not looking quite as well defined as it was. However, most of the forecast models that we see do indicate that there will likely be a period of strengthening, perhaps once again, as we head into the day tomorrow, and that may lead us back up to Category 4 status and likely bouncing back and forth between 3 and 4 as it approaches the coast. Let's show you that approach starting off here this evening, well offshore. We're going to run this through late tomorrow morning. By the time we get towards late morning tomorrow, it will be off the North Carolina coast, but notice the wind and the rain still well away from our area through most of the day tomorrow. Now, as we work our way towards Thursday evening, especially past sunset, that's when it really starts to bear down on the coast of North Carolina. But even then, while it is cloudy, while we may see a couple of outer bands, it's a little bit on the gusty side. It's nothing too out of the ordinary. That starts to change, though, as we head from Thursday evening into very early on Friday morning. That is when the storm makes its closest approach to the North Carolina coastline. It could even bump on shore. But then as we head from Friday morning into Friday afternoon, notice it just kind of sits here and even wobbles its way back towards the south a little bit. So this is late Friday evening. We're well within rounds of heavy rain. We're getting tropical storm force wind gusts. And then as we head from Friday evening into Friday night and into Saturday morning, notice the system very near the coast. And that's what Robert and I were talking about. Once we see the center near or just offshore, that's when we start to develop the strong onshore winds. And that's when we see the surge beginning to develop. But this is all the way into Saturday afternoon. With that track kind of taking it just to our south, we're still in extremely heavy rain and extremely strong winds, perhaps gusting as high as hurricane force near the beaches during the day Saturday. So our peak wind gusts likely come Friday night into Saturday, focusing at 70 to 90 miles per hour across the Grand Strand. The 100 mile per hour gust at this point we think stay just off to our north and just offshore out over the Atlantic. Still, though, this is plenty enough to do some damage and causes some fairly widespread power outages. Even inland, though, we're likely looking at 40 to 50 to 60 mile per hour peak wind gusts, especially as we head towards late Friday, Friday night into the day on Saturday. And as I showed you at the top of the newscast, the rainfall, that forecast continues to increase now with 8 to 12 across most of the coastal sections. Locally 15 to 20 inches, and even inland looking at locally as much as 10 inches of rain now as we head through the next couple of days. It may still be raining at times as we work our way into the day on Sunday. So we keep emphasizing this is a very prolonged event, and the fact that it's prolonged is something we're also going to need to think about when it comes to reentry. And when it comes to the cleanup, it's going to take quite some time to kind of get that weather to wind down and get things back under control once the storm moves out. So we'll continue to watch for that. We're also waiting on that 5 o'clock advisory. We'll have the very latest when it comes out. All right, obviously flooding a big concern with any tropical storm or hurricane you have working its way towards the coast. When you slow it down to a crawl, that flood potential tends to go absolutely through the roof, and we continue to bump up our rainfall totals and look at that flood threat really going up.
Yeah, this one's going to last for a couple of days, likely kind of starting late on Thursday all the way through maybe midday on Sunday before it starts to get out of here. And that latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, kind of right on top of that still.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get into that brand new track in just a second. We do want to talk about, because it is so important, that risk for flooding. And with the track now that sort of brings Florence slowly down the coast, we have bumped those rainfall totals now up to 8 to 12 inches across most of Horry County into Georgetown County. And it's possible, depending on how those bands set up, where they set up persistently, that we could locally be talking about 15 inches or more of rainfall.
We've been dry recently, but when you put this kind of rain on there, I don't think it's going to matter.
Absolutely.
There's still going to be localized flooding issues and then prolonged issues later on with river flooding. Keep in mind the Waccamaw comes right through here. Areas up here getting 20 to 30 inches of rain, as we saw with Matthew. When it rains heavy up here, it all flows down to Waccamaw. So it's not just this weekend. This is going to be an issue the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is the third time now that we're having to deal with this. And again, this is sort of a broad brush approach, but what's really going to be critical as we head through sort of the event is where we see those pockets of heavy rain one, to determine where we get sort of the immediate flash flooding, and two, where all of that water will eventually go in the week to 2 weeks following Florence. Do we see a big flood scenario develop on our river? So that's what we're going to be watching really closely. And here's the reason why. We mentioned that really prolonged period. Let's start this off here, to start the clock at Thursday into early Friday morning. You can see the center still offshore of Wilmington, and then just ever so slowly drifting down the coast. This is Friday evening. As we work our way towards Saturday morning, we're still in it.
And you see the red in here. This is very, very heavy rainfall. And with the flow coming off the Atlantic, it's a steady flow of tropical moisture on this side of the storm. So this is where we'll get that heaviest rain potential.
Yep.
Couple of inches an hour, certainly a possibility in here. And how they set up, we talked about those big amounts. Get stuck underneath one of these heavier bands, could be pushing up towards that 15-inch level.
Right, absolutely. And then even as we head towards Saturday evening, if the center sinks down to our south or maybe even sneaks into Georgetown County, we're still getting that strong onshore flow of just abundant tropical moisture, and within that we'll have those bands of just absolutely blinding and torrential rainfall, and some of that may even linger all the way into parts of Sunday. Let's talk about that brand new forecast track now. Let's take this full and show you exactly what we're looking at. The 5 o'clock advisory just coming in literally over the past few minutes, and with that we see that the intensity thankfully has come down just a notch. We are looking at winds right now at 120 miles per hour. The movement off to the northwest at 16. So it's a steady forward motion, but the latest advisory, sort of a good news, bad news scenario. Here is that brand new forecast track. Notice by tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, still well offshore of southeastern North Carolina as a Category 3. And while it's hauling today, notice how long it takes to go from here tomorrow afternoon to here, 2 a.m. Friday morning, slowing to a crawl and still likely a Category 3 hurricane, and then even slower to go from here to here as we head towards Friday afternoon. So southeastern North Carolina getting persistently blasted with wind and rain. And then we see that turn that kind of begins to just wobble its way down the coast, so that as we head towards Saturday afternoon, still likely a minimal hurricane. It's going to weaken, being that it's near the coast, but as we just showed you, it's still blowing the wind and the rain onshore, and then finally beginning to shift its way further inland and weakening, but still dumping a tremendous amount of rainfall. Now let's talk about the wind potential and kind of planning it out. This is for Myrtle Beach and the Grand Strand. Here are the hurricane force winds, and then we have the tropical storm force winds. We start to see those as we head into the day on Friday, maybe even as early as tomorrow night, a few tropical storm force gusts. And then we see those winds beginning to increase here as we work our way through Friday night. And notice the peak winds, when we could be gusting 70 to 90 miles per hour across the Grand Strand, occur during the day on Saturday, and then just gradually winding down as we head through the day Sunday. Across the PD, we're not looking at hurricane force gusts across the PD, but still a prolonged stretch here where we could see those winds gusting 40 to 60 miles per hour. That could last from Friday evening all the way through Sunday morning, and that long duration certainly enough to result in some fairly widespread power outages and downed trees.